Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. A reader or viewer, whatever you want to call yourself, wrote to me recently and suggested that I do some repertoire videos featuring some smaller works, shorter works, tone poems and the like. And of course, I should. I really should. Most of these things, because you have to remember something. We're really just getting started. I keep telling myself that because it's been about, 4 years? I think we're going to be coming up on our 5-year anniversary in May. And we've done about 500 repertoire videos. And most of those have been symphonies and concertos and symphony cycles and concerto cycles and things like that, because that was like the main stuff we needed to tackle. Oratorios, a few operas here and there. And still we managed to do 500 of them, which is, a not inconsiderable number, but there are a bazillion wonderful overtures and shorter works that we also should tackle. And I plan to do that. And so I'm going to be doing more of that, I think. It's a lot of fun to do, first of all. And second of all, it's not less work. I have to say, because you've got to find these things tucked in the corners where they are with other things. And sometimes, the differences in performance between a work that's only 10 minutes long, between one performance and the next, you don't find these large variations that make it easier to make comparisons. But that's my problem. That's not your problem. I'm just pointing out the fact that, it's still a job. And so we're going to be doing it as quickly as I can and with as much variety as possible. And we're beginning right now with Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture, or Fingal's Cave, if you want to call it that. This is, I think, a great place to start. This was suggested by the viewer, and I thank him very much for this suggestion, because it really did get me thinking, get me going on this. So yeah, it's a terrific idea, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it extensively because there's so much popular music to cover that fits in this category. Now, the Hebrides, I think, is a wonderful place to start for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a screaming masterpiece. Second of all, everybody loves it. Third of all, everyone records it. There's like 20 trillion recordings of it. Although I have to confess, I was shocked. I did a search on Amazon under Mendelssohn Hebrides, and very few recordings came up, considering how many there are, how many I have. It's really depressing to see how physical product is vanishing into thin air. On streaming services, there's much more available. And so, I have to take that into consideration too. But the other reason I think the Hebrides is a great piece to start with, other than is that everybody knows it, right? Da 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 dum bum, yeah da 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 dum bum. It's like, yeah, way, it's great, and then it's in cartoons. It was Halloween things. I don't know. It's just one of those things that's in our DNA, culturally speaking, but even beyond that, it makes a great piece to talk about discographically, because there are a lot of recordings that are wonderful, that are historical recordings and modern recordings. It has a thread that runs through it, and I've tried to find sort of a collection of recordings here that I've only chosen a dozen, because it's enough. It really is. And there are many others, as I've always said, that are very good, that aren't on the list, but this gives you a sense of the possibilities of the work. And that's the last criterion, because it really does offer a lot of opportunities for interpretive nuance. And that's because of Mendelssohn's genius and the interesting way in which the piece is structured. And by that I mean, it's an overture in sonata form. It's not crazy that way. But the point is that the exciting bits, the loud bits, are reserved for areas other than dealing with the main thematic material, at least initially. The opening, the first subject is that da 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 bum, right? That Mendelssohn doodles that for a little while, and with swells and crescendos on the timpani, but he never lets the orchestra cut loose. And then there's a transition to the second subject. Usually in like classical sonata form, the transition from the first theme to the second major subject group is motion music full of activity and, and instability and loudness and whatnot. So you get the feeling of moving somewhere. It doesn't happen here. It just segues gently into the beautiful lyrical second subject, which is a wonderful melody. I mean, it's a melody that actually it creates its own kind of tension because of its unusual phrase rhythm. A phrase rhythm. In other words, when you first hear it, you may be forgiven for thinking of it going like this. Do 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 ya da da dum ya da 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 da. That's not how it goes. That's not how it goes at all. That first limb of the melody is extended. It's longer than you think it ought to be. If you really listen to it, it goes ya da 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 dum ba da 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 dum da 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 dum. It's like it holds on to itself for the first bit, and then it moves forward. That's important, and that's an important aspect of the performance that you want to hear, that a conductor should bring out. There's a sense of this sort of suspense and then fluidity, which I really, really like. It's a fascinating melody. You should listen to it carefully when you hear the overture. It's just these little subtleties. I mean, when I went through most of my life thinking that the second subject was da 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 instead of da 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 da. It's oh wow. No, it's not what Mendelssohn wrote. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and an interesting sort of example of psychology in music. How we hear things or trim things to make them more symmetrical than they really are. Where Mendelssohn takes great pains to make sure that it's just a bit asymmetrical. Anyway, so then the first big moment only occurs after that, in the transition from the exposition to the development section, to the middle section. So, I mean, that's something that I listen for and something that you can hear for yourself. And the question is, how do conductors handle the tempos, the relative tempos between those two initial themes, and then what's usually an accelerando into the first big, orchestral outburst? It should go quicker. It must go quicker or else we're in big trouble. And then in the central development section, there are all kinds of moments where you want to hear very characterful interjections from the woodwinds, particularly. Dun, 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 bum. You've got to hear a little, rhythmic precision and beautiful intonation. They're little fanfares and flashes of color always coming at you, and they need to be characterized. And then when you get to the end of the work, that's a whole other thing, because that's where you've got the really big climax, with the strings going, the scales rushing up and down, and it's a huge turbulent storm of music. But then as it makes a diminuendo, you want to hear the trumpet with a single note underneath it all, just a long held note that carries you from that wild coda straight out to the soft ending. And when that trumpet comes in, it's a moment. It's a quiet moment, but it's a moment. And you want the conductor to take notice of the moment. And some of these take more notice of that moment than others. It doesn't mean you blast it out and be vulgar about it, but it's something that you're supposed to hear. It's important. And it's a really wonderful example of Mendelssohn's sensitivity in scoring, because he's usually very conservative with his handling of brass parts. He reserves his brass section for big climaxes, for fanfare-like motives, for things that brass instruments naturally do. But, here he wants that color, that jet of color underneath these oscillating strings, and you want to hear that. So, there's things like that. And then at the very last bit, do you slow down? Do you make a retard? Or do you stay basically in tempo so that it just, and it's over? Lots of things to listen for in only 9 minutes of music. And I've been talking for more than 9 minutes about that 9 minutes of music. So there you go. So let's talk about the 12 recordings that I've chosen, the best and some of the not best. Some that I don't particularly care for, but I wanted to mention them anyway. They're famous recordings, so we should. Beginning with, historically, I have two historical recordings that have to be mentioned. First, Toscanini. This is on Testament, because I don't think there was there an RCA Hebrides? I don't think so. On regular RCA, but this is a live recording. It's coupled with the Scottish Symphony and Schumann's Second Symphony with the NBC Symphony. And it's dated. Oh, I know they're going to do this to me, aren't they? Hang on, I'll tell you what it's dated. It's a stunning performance. My God, is it powerful? From Studio 8H, 1945. In relatively good sound, as remastered here. And boy, does Toscanini whip up a fury at the end of the piece. It's just amazing with a really powerful diminuendo at the end. And you hear that trumpet? Oh, yes. The thing that's so cool about this, actually, is that, performances of this piece tend to run somewhere between 9 and a bit minutes and 11 minutes. If you go much over 11 minutes, you're probably in a little trouble. I mean, 11 minutes and 20 seconds you can manage. That's okay. It can work quite well. It depends on the internal contrast. Much faster than 9 minutes, you get a scramble, I would think. But I don't think anyone's done it really that much quicker. But in any case, here is a stunning performance that lasts 9 minutes and 56 seconds. Most performances are right in the 10-minute range. And this is one of them. And it is just amazing. It's fantastic. So for historical recordings, that's definitely worth considering. Then we've got Beecham. I mean, we so badly need a Beecham box, 2 Beecham boxes. We need all of his EMI recordings and all of his Sony recordings, carefully remastered, lovingly presented. Nowadays, they may be carefully remastered. They're not going to be lovingly presented. There really ought to be a Columbia Beecham set. I don't know why he's so ignored. Maybe because the repertoire he did was too interesting. I don't know. But this is a marvelous Hebrides. This is 9 minutes and 29 seconds. It's also on the quick side, and it tells us, actually, this is with the Royal Philharmonic, it tells us, by the way, that there was a tendency, you could hear it in historical recordings to modern recordings, to get slower, a little bit slower. We're only talking 30 seconds here or a minute here. But yeah, things sort of slowed down a little bit after from the way the big guys did it. And part of that is because the big guys were not as persnickety, even Toscanini, about certain details as people are now. They weren't looking for the utmost perfection by slowing the tempo down. They wanted the utmost perfection at tempo, and that's the difference. Anyway, this is a wonderful performance, too. A little dry and boxy in the sonics, but it's okay. And do they have a date for this? Oh, who knows if they have a date. Let me see if they graced us with actual recording information. Well, there's none there. Here we go. Let's see. Recorded, The Fingal's Cave, recorded at EMI Studio 1, Abbey Road in 1950. So there you go. Really another incredibly compelling performance. And remember, these are performances by people who really understood the Romantic style. They understood Mendelssohn. I mean, they probably knew him. They were around for a long time. And so they're useful. They're very useful performances as benchmarks for this particular work. Historical recordings aren't always that useful, but here I think they are. Then we have Karajan and the Berlin Phil. Now, he recorded this a couple times because it's Karajan. He did it for EMI. He did it for Deutsche Grammophon. I loathe this performance. I think it's awful. First of all, it lasts, let's see, how long now? It's 10 minutes and 10 seconds. So it's the right timing. It's right comparable with these guys, but it's a big, blowsy performance. Blowsy. It's like recorded in an aircraft hangar, and it has beautiful, powerful climaxes and big strings, and the woodwinds and the brass are often left field somewhere. It's too stringy, entirely too stringy. I find it to be really unconvincing. The other overtures and intermezzi are fabulous, and it's all in context. If you're listening to this, it's the last thing on the program after it's like track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Hearing all this other great stuff, and then the Hebrides. Oh, there's 10 tracks. Pardon me. You might it's not so terrible. But compared to what we've just heard, it's in, when you have real-time listening comparisons, oh, what a difference. You get the Karajan sound, and the DG performance is quite similar. So, yeah, that's not where I think the Hebrides ought to be. It doesn't sound Hebridean. It just sounds stringy. Here's an interesting performance that most people probably forgot about. Haitink and the London Philharmonic. Now, this is coupled with the First Symphony. That's why I got this originally, because something fell out, because I wanted the First Symphony. At the time I got this, the First Symphony, there weren't that many individual versions of it, and it's a wonderful work that nobody plays. But this Hebrides is a beautiful performance. Let me take a look at the timing here, just so that we can get a sense of it. 10 minutes and 4 seconds, you see? Everybody's sort of are where they ought to be. And it's lovely. Haitink's London Philharmonic legacy has been somewhat underrated and not given the attention that his Concertgebouw legacy has, of course, because the Concertgebouw is one of the world's great orchestras, and he sort of came into his own there. He wound up with the LPO because, they wouldn't give him a Beethoven cycle at Amsterdam because they thought he was too immature. They gave it to Joachim. It was in the early 60s, and they were right. He was, because he did a Beethoven cycle with the LPO, and it sucked. And he did a bunch of Liszt tone poems, and they sucked. But on the other hand, there's this Mendelssohn disc. There's a fabulous Planets, an amazing Scheherazade. He did some beautiful things with the LPO, and some of that stuff might be worth reconsidering. Anyway, this Hebrides is a lovely performance. It's one of those beautiful, natural. It doesn't have any particularly outstanding things happening in it that will make you sit up and go like, whoa. But on the other hand, it has this inevitability and sensibility that's excellent, and wonderful relationships between all the tempi and all that. It's terrific. So that's something worth thinking about. It's on Decca now, if it exists at all. That was a Philips twofer, coupled with the Chailly Mendelssohn Lobesgesang. Yeah, really. And then we've got this one. This is one of these French sort of RCA things, but it contains the Mendelssohn Overture disc, or most of it anyway, with the Bamberg Symphony under Klaus-Peter Flor. Now, Klaus-Peter Flor is a splendid conductor. I mean, he hasn't had a career that, that his talents merit, but he's a first-class conductor, and he did a big box of Mendelssohn stuff for RCA, which is really very, very fine. I mean, there's nothing weak in it at all. And it's got like all the symphonies and a bunch of concertos and overtures and orchestrated songs and all kinds of nifty stuff. The Erste Walpurgisnacht is in there, all kinds of really good Mendelssohn. And his overtures are lovely. There are only a few Mendelssohn overture discs. Neville Marriner did one that was semi-interesting, and there's this one, which is probably one of the better ones out there. Claudio Abbado did one, but we'll get to him in a minute. And this performance of the Hebrides is absolutely lovely, 10 minutes and 12 seconds of it. First-class understanding of Mendelssohn's idiom, sensitivity to the music, and it's very nicely played by the Bamberg Orchestra and very well recorded. So, Klaus-Peter Flor's Mendelssohn generally is worth considering, and this performance of the Hebrides is a very fine one. So there's that one. Then we come to Abbado. Abbado and Mendelssohn were sort of made for each other, I think. He did a whole bunch of, cycles with the London Symphony, and, he did Brahms. Well, he didn't do Brahms. Well, he did some Brahms with him, but he did Mendelssohn, he did Schubert, then he did his Ravel cycle, and he did other things like that. And the Mendelssohn symphonies were very highly regarded. Sonically, they were not considered fabulous because they were early digital, and the early digital sonics were kind of like glassy. And they still are a little bit, but they're not. It's not terrible. It's not unlistenable. I wish he had remade Hebrides with the Berlin Phil, because there's that Sony disc that has the Mendelssohn Midsummer Night's Dream music and the Italian Symphony, which is really, really good. It would have been great if he'd done another Hebrides there. Maybe he did, and I didn't see it. But in any case, there's another Mendelssohn Overture disc here, and it's first class. It's absolutely first class. Abbado is good with Mendelssohn because Mendelssohn is a bit of a micromanager as a composer. He's a detail guy. He's refined and always controlled, but not in a bad way. It doesn't mean he doesn't let things go, but you can do a lot If you're a conductor who cares about subtlety and nuance, and Abbado was one of those guys. There's no question about it. So his Hebrides is worth hearing, especially in the context of his Mendelssohn recordings. Generally, they're all very, very sensitive, beautiful performances. So let's see. Let me see here. Where is the Hebrides? There it is. I thought it was here. Yep, there it is. It's on CD1. But they redid these things and released a disc of all the overtures and other things. And that's actually worth having because it's just a lot of really good music that it's hard to find collected in one place. The Hebrides, there it is, 10 minutes and 24 seconds, you see? Just terrific. Then we have Lenny. Oh, yes, Lenny. We keep forgetting that Leonard Bernstein was born and raised in that ripe romantic tradition. His mentors were Koussevitzky and Metropolis, and he was taught by Reiner. I mean, you don't get a better pedigree than that. And he was one of those conductors who grew up playing Mendelssohn. I mean, today people don't. And nowadays, if they do it, they try to do like a period instrument thing, which is just so stupid because there's a continuous tradition of Mendelssohn playing that goes right back to Mendelssohn himself, and which these musicians who were born in the early years of the 20th century or the late 19th century, I mean, they knew this stuff like the back of their hand. There's no discontinuity when it comes to performance practice or anything like that. It's all, we've gone through this before. This performance is 9 minutes and 2 seconds. And it's a smoker. It's very exciting. It's about as fast as the piece can go and still hang together properly. And I love it. I love it. And it's full of personality. It really is. It just moves. It really, really rocks. And so, yeah, New York Phil with Bernstein on Sony, definitely worth considering. And if you've considered that, you also have to consider Mr. Szell with Cleveland. It's the opposite of Bernstein. This one is 10 minutes and 51 seconds. It's one of the slower ones, one of the slowest actually, which is surprising. But Szell, Szell was a control freak, and this is the most controlled. It doesn't mean it doesn't have its explosive climaxes or it doesn't go places. It does, but it opens up with great deliberation, and then when it finally erupts, it's very eruptive. You have a wide dynamic range, and you always get the sense that there is a guiding hand at the helm. Some people might find this a little bit too controlled. I find that Szell can be that way. There are moments where you feel that his grip is just too tight and that the orchestra wants to just let go. But again, Mendelssohn is one of those composers where you can really, take the reins and still not lose anything in translation. So this is one of the more deliberate performances, but it's also one of the most beautifully played. Oh my God, when the clarinet comes in with the second subject of the recapitulation, it's just to die for. And as usual with Szell, that final diminuendo, the final climax of diminuendo is just so perfectly judged. My goodness, he does the same thing at the end of the Moldau from Smetana's Mavlast, these long, gradual diminuendi and things like that. Incredible, just incredible. So this is a famous performance, and definitely another one that's extremely personal and individualized. Here's an exciting one. This one is sort of a whopper. Dorati with the London Symphony on Mercury Living Presence, 10 minutes and 10 seconds. Now here, you don't get the trumpet at the end very much. Dorati is not so much into incidental detail, but it's one of those Mercury Living Presence recordings, which is very vivid. It's really up front and in your face. And for some reason, I can't explain exactly how he does it, but there's an excitement to this. From the very, very beginning, you feel the power, the surge of, the ocean right from the start. And so when the eruptive things erupt, it's very fulfilling. It really is. I listened to this a couple of times in preparation for this chat because, I noticed I had it and I hadn't heard it in a long time. I was listening to it going like, whoa. again, there's just, a sense of these are people who understand how this music's supposed to go or what it can do. And he lets it happen. And it does. So that's worth considering. On Mercury Living Presence, it's coupled with, by the way, the Italian with Skrovichevsky and the Scottish Symphony. And there's a Dorati box with all of his LSO stuff coming out soon. So this will be returning to currency rather shortly. And what's this one? Oh, of course, Peter Maag. Yes, with the London Symphony, these classic performances by Peter Maag. I mean, they've been, they're almost legendary. They've been regarded as the ultimate best wonderful things in the universe. 10 minutes and 3 seconds for the Hebrides, right smack dab in the middle. These are wonderfully played, beautifully sung, luscious performances, full of character. And, there aren't that many Peter Maag recordings out there. And his Mendelssohn has just been reference-worthy Mendelssohn from the very start. And it still is. It still is. It's very nicely recorded. This is the Classic Sound series version of it. But there is a Peter Maag box, as you know, from Australian Eloquence, where it has this stuff in it as well. I particularly like this disc because it's got the Scottish Symphony, which is one of the reference versions of that piece, and a wonderful selection from A Midsummer Night's Dream. So it's like sort of the perfect Mendelssohn disc. I mean, if you get this, you are in great shape, Mendelssohniously speaking. So there you have it. Then, we're down to our last two. And what might they be? Oh, the suspense. Yes. Dohnányi in Vienna. This is my reference for Mendelssohn Symphony Cycle. It's absolutely first class. Dohnányi was very much similar to, to Abbado in the sense that he was kind of he could be a bit of a fuss budget. He was a classical conductor, restrained conductor, but that works to Mendelssohn's advantage. And he's got the Vienna Philharmonic, which he gets them to play gorgeously. He didn't take any crap from the Vienna Phil. There's no sloppiness. It's rhythmically taught. 10 minutes and 6 seconds here, yes, which is just exactly right. These symphony performances are marvelous. These are two twofers with the whole cycle of stuff. They also came out in a little box. We need a Dohnányi Vienna box. We had the Dohnányi Cleveland box. Now it's time for the Dohnányi Vienna box, which has some unbelievably great stuff in it, including this Mendelssohn cycle. This is as good as it gets. It really is. He also has on here, not on here, but in the other one, Die Erste Walpurgisnacht, which he recorded twice. How many people do that twice? Once for Telarc. So it just goes to show that he and Mendelssohn were simpatico. And so in this performance, you really hear the Vienna Phil doing its thing and Dohnányi keeping things moving and keeping it lean and mean as it necessarily needs to be. However, yes, the recording to end all recordings of the Hebrides. That's it. And Finster agrees. See, she's right there. Right? Don't you think? You think I'm right? Yeah, it's Klemperer. Now, this shocked me, and it will shock you. Klemperer has a reputation for being like heavy and Germanic and slow and not terribly flexible when it comes to tempi and things like that. But wow, baby, are we wrong when it comes to his performance of the Hebrides with the Philharmonia in 1960 in really good sound with just amazing playing, 10 minutes and 16 seconds. See, he's right up there with the young bucks. It's not one of these slow, heavy slog things. Not at all. From the very beginning, he creates an incredible feeling of atmosphere. There's tremendous tension in the swells of the timpani. The transition to the second subject is absolutely perfect. Trust me, she likes Klemperer. She just has to get fed. I mean, food and Klemperer, which would you pick? Anyway, it really is amazing. And the climaxes, he really cuts loose at the climaxes. I mean, he speeds up a lot. Really amazing. And in that central section, with all of those wonderfully detailed woodwind sniglets, you hear all of them. They're characterized, and they're like flashes of light. It's just amazing. The last climax with the diminuendo, which stays mostly in tempo, as I think it should. Personally, I mean, their other performances are okay if they want to do something else with it, but it's just fantastic. And if you've got that Klemperer box, the big remastered edition, it sounds even better. This is the previous incarnation of it, but listen to this. Listen to this, and you will be really, really impressed with just how effortless and natural, but at the same time full of panache and character and brilliance. Even this performance is. It's a stunner. It's really remarkable, and it surprised me. It really surprised me because, preparing this talk, I listened to zillions of these things. And I put this one on, and I didn't have expectations for it. I thought it was going to be kind of like, a little stiff, a little, because it's not, suppleness was not something you usually think about when you think of Klemperer. But, oh, baby, was I wrong, which just goes to show that no matter what we do, we must always keep on listening. So thank you for joining me, friends. Take care.